So I feel like this isn't anything that I've prepared to talk to you about, but I feel like just talking to you here, it's something is sort of becoming clear to me, which is that I feel like your argument for your electability is flawless. It at least is something that resonates with me deeply. I'm a lifelong liberal, and I have always wanted politics both around me locally and in my country broadly to get more to the left. I've always felt that way. And I believe that you are right when you talk about expanding the electorate and when you talk about trying to reach a diverse coalition, particularly people who think that politics don't work for them. But it's not happening in your campaign, and it's not happening more so in your campaign now than it did in 2016.
Rachel,
and
right
I want to know if you have any analysis yourself of why that's not improving.
Let's take a step backwards, okay? If a year ago you had, or anybody else had thought, that somebody is running an unprecedented grassroots campaign which has raised more money for more people than any other candidate in the history of this country, we're taken on Wall Street. You know that today the stock market went way up. The healthcare industry and the drug companies did very, very well today. You know why? Because Biden had a good day yesterday. All right, you're talking to a candidate uniquely who's taken on the entire corporate establishment. You're talking to a candidate who's taking on the political establishment. Mr. Bloomberg comes on board Biden, other candidates, and he will solidify his support with the political leadership. We're taking that on. We're running a grassroots campaign. This has never been done in the modern history of this country.
You did it in 2016.
No, we didn't. We lost in 2016. We're trying to build. Right now, we have far more support than we had in 2016. So we're trying to do something that is, we're trying to transform this country, not win an election, not just beat Trump. We're trying to break up large banks. We're trying to substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs. We're trying to do what every other major country on earth does, provide health care to all people as a human right. We have introduced the most sweeping and comprehensive climate change proposal ever introduced by a federal candidate, which is why we have the support of the Sunrise Movement and many other environmental organizations. This is tough stuff. So if I came to you and said, hey, you know, I just went to Wall Street, I had a fundraiser down the block, man, we're raising a lot of money, I got my ads, I hired my consultants. That's what candidates often do. We're doing it differently. And I would be the first to admit that it's hard. The real question is, how do we come this far? Taking on the corporate establishment, taking on and taking on the corporate media, if I might say so, as well. So I'm pretty proud of what we have accomplished. I'm proud that in the last number of months, we have had thousands of people knocking on millions of doors in this country. This is what needs to happen. I will be the first person to tell you it is hard. Okay? I'm not running a conventional campaign. We call our movement Us, Not Me. I'm not saying vote for Bernie Sanders, we're going to solve the problems. We are in this together. Because the only way real change, Rachel, and I know you're a student of history, whether it's the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, how does change happen? When millions of people stand up and demand that. That is what this campaign is about. So it's a different type of campaign. And we're doing quite well within that context. Right now, as of today, we may or may not be a point or two, a delegate or two ahead of Biden or a delegate or two behind him when California is counted. I think that that's pretty good. And I think that given the agenda that we are bringing forth, that we have a shot to win the Democratic nomination and a shot to defeat Donald Trump. I think that's pretty good.